Hi friends, Lauren here again with yet another video. The issue today is how, once again, the Democrats need to speak more clearly and plainly about yet another important issue. This time it's the issue that, quote, democracy is on the ballot and that Donald Trump is a threat to democracy. I've heard Democrats say that over and over again. Democracy's on the ballot. Said that way, I can see some people actually looking for the word democracy on their actual ballot. Can't you? So what I haven't heard Democrats say is exactly what that means. What does it mean to say that Donald Trump poses a threat to our democracy? Now, what does it mean? It means quite simply that if Donald Trump gets reelected, we're all going to be living under a dictatorship, i.e. something that's very similar to communism. I'm not being alarmist here, friends. It's just the truth. You know, over the past 20 years or so, I've talked to several people who grew up in communist countries. Now, one of them was a contractor that did some work for us in our former home. He grew up in Romania when it was still under the control of the Soviet Union. Another is our friend who grew up in Ethiopia after a military coup in 1974 ousted the democratically elected president, Haile Selassie. And a third was the time I spoke to two guys from Cuba who owned an Airbnb in Tampa, Florida, where we stayed for a couple of days. Now, in all of those conversations, I heard a lot about exactly what it's like to grow up under communism. The guys in Tampa talked about the fact that there was, more often than not, no food in the grocery stores, and that there were long lines for bread for some reason, specifically, when it was available. They talked about the fact that when they first walked into a Walmart, they cried, seeing all the food and other items that were available to buy. My friend from Romania talked about what it was like when he and his parents traveled to their grandparents' house by car. He said all along the way there were government checkpoints where they had to stop and answer questions from government agents about where they were going, the purpose of the trip, and how long they were going to be there. Traveling by air, when you make your reservation, the question is, what's the purpose of your travel? You see, under authoritarian rule, under a dictatorship, my friends, the government controls everything. The books we read, the movies and television shows that are allowed to be made, the plays that are allowed to be produced, what can be taught in schools and in universities. The government is also corrupt as all get out. It's corrupt to the core, with the president and his friends taking all the country's wealth. The military is used against civilians, against citizens. If for some reason you've done something that the government doesn't like, you can be picked up, arrested, given a sham trial, and sentenced to a long prison term without any due process at all. You know as well as I do that Russia has done that very thing in the recent past to a number of American citizens. Paul Whelan and Brittany Griner, among others, come to mind. And surveillance? Spying on average citizens? It's everywhere. Sure, in our country we do have security cameras now pretty much everywhere, but we have no idea about either the kind or the level of surveillance that exists in communist countries. You're even afraid to do certain searches on your computer. Just ask anyone who's lived in Russia, and they'll tell you what the KGB will do. They'll tell you. My friends, when you live under a dictatorship, under authoritarian rule, or under communism, you're essentially living in jail. You're imprisoned. You live in constant fear and learn to keep your head down and your mouth shut. Why do you think the millions of Eastern Europeans who lived under Soviet rule for so long were so happy to get out from under the Soviet Union? Why do you think so many of them celebrated and literally danced in the streets when the Berlin Wall fell? Listen, friends, I'm not being an alarmist here. I'm just echoing what Donald Trump himself has said he would do if he were reelected. You remember? He said he was going to suspend the Constitution and be a dictator on day one of his term. Now, yes, he was implying that he'd be a dictator on only one day, the first day of his term, but do you actually believe that? I mean, look, he's publicly and unabashedly praised all the dictators around the world, or many of them. Vladimir Putin of Russia, Viktor Orban of Hungary, Kim Jong-un of North Korea, Xi Jinping of China. He's praised them all. He's called them all smart and tough. He admires them. He wants to be like them. And most frightening of all, he wants to be one of them. So folks, I'll never understand why the Democrats are saying only that Donald Trump is a threat to democracy and that democracy is on the ballot next month. I don't understand why they say only that without spelling out exactly what that means, i.e. that if he wins, we will all be living under a dictatorship. Look, I'm 71 years old, and I've had a great career and really a wonderful life. But I'm really concerned about all my little friends who are children right now and teens and those who are, in their 20s and 30s and 40s, like my nieces and nephews. I'm really worried about Americans who are in their 50s and 60s. You still have so much more to do. Heck, I'm afraid for myself because if reelected, Donald Trump is going to slash Medicare and my Social Security benefits, and of course those of millions of other Americans too. Republicans have already run on those two things. I never thought we'd be facing the threat of dictatorship and authoritarianism in the United States. Never. Not here. But I guess it was just inevitable that someday somebody with dictator ambitions would eventually come along, would eventually rise up. And tragically, frighteningly, that day is now. Now, this has actually happened before in the United States, but that person, that wannabe dictator, has always been on the fringe of our politics. He was never a real threat, but now that we have an entire political party backing such a person, this time it is a threat to us all. My friend from Ethiopia actually said to me, Lauren, what we're seeing in this country today is how it starts. This is how it starts. With someone who speaks just like Donald Trump, who turns people against each other like Donald Trump does, who says you can trust only him, and who just makes up stuff and lies with abandon no matter who it hurts, and who'll do anything for power. But you know what, my friend said? Americans don't have a clue what they're playing with Donald Trump. Not a clue. You guys have always been free. So you just don't get it. Friends, Republicans are already banning books and prohibiting diversity, equity, and inclusion training in schools and workplaces. They're going after transgender people and even outlawed a woman's very private and personal decision about whether to continue a pregnancy. They ran on that too, remember? And they delivered. And with their Project 2025 plans, they're just getting started. The bottom line is that Democrats need to speak more clearly and explicitly about this. And not only just say that democracy is on the ballot in this election, but to really explain to the American people exactly what that means, what the stakes are. They need to explain what it means in terms of the unavailability of food and of the unavailability of basic supplies that we need to live, that we Americans just take for granted are going to be there in the stores. And they need to explain what it means for our basic freedom. I wish I were a Democratic strategist. Suffice it to say, friends, that this is the most consequential, the most important election in all of our lives. It's going to determine whether we remain a free society or become a dictatorship. And I don't know whether you know this or not, but nowadays, so many elections are won or lost on a handful of votes, sometimes as few as 1,000 or even 100 or 10 or yes, even 1. It's happened. It's happened before. Just Google how many elections have been won on one vote. You'll see that it's happened and that it's happened more than once. So yes, your vote, every vote, your vote counts. And remember, with the help of the Supreme Court in 2000, it was declared that George W. Bush won the state of Florida by 537 votes. Close to 6 million votes were cast in Florida that year, but the presidential election was decided by 537 of those 6 million votes. Oh well, that's it for today, friends. In my next video, I'll explain how we got here politically. What's been the long march, the series of events that ultimately led to the rise of an authoritarian figure on our national stage. That's going to be a really good one, and you won't want to miss it. So please, vote for democracy next month. Tell all your friends and family to vote as well, and share this video. Believe me, you do not want to live under communist rule. This is so important. That's it for now. Thanks, friends. See you next time.